So, today I want to talk about landlord retaliation. Landlords have a lot of power over the lives of those that they rent to. Much like a boss, a landlord has the capacity to control a major aspect of your life in an authoritarian manner. However, instead of dealing with this at work, they control the place that you live. This gives landlords a lot of sway and power over our lives. If they don't repair something, if they decide to raise rent, or they change the rules in any way, this can greatly affect not just our own lives, but the lives of our friends, our family members, as well as anyone else that we may care very deeply about. If they felt like it, they could ask us to leave the very homes that we call our own, disrupt our way of life, and make things a living hell for us. Especially if you're someone on a short term or month to month lease, you can be evicted pretty much right away, especially if you're in certain states that don't provide protections. This power dynamic is inherently imbalanced, and today I want to talk about what often happens when tenants try to fight back, even if it's through perfectly legal means. We call the response of this landlord in these circumstances landlord retaliation. And like the name suggests, it means that landlords use the power that they are able to use and exploit people with their authoritarian powers that I previously mentioned in such a way as to strike back at tenants for demanding their basic rights. So, I want to show some examples off today and talk a little bit about this. So, we start off with an example that is in Sacramento, California, where a tenant, about 6 weeks after they reported a code violation at their rental home, received a letter taped to her door. This person and their nephew had just 3 days to get out of South Sacramento house, or the landlord would file eviction paperwork at the courthouse. With nowhere to go, the pair did not leave. The eviction is now underway. If they have to go, the person said that she will not only become homeless, but also could lose custody of her nephew, who's been in her care for the last decade. And these are the ways that we can actually be harmed in ways that go beyond just housing. If you end up without a home, the state can deem you unfit to take care of the child in your life that you're taking care of, and you can lose custody. And so that's what's happening here. The person has never missed a rent payment for 3.5 years and has lived at the house, with no issue. Meanwhile, the National Property Management Company, Home River Group, is seeking the eviction for what they deem as other reasons, alleging she sublet the apartment, made verbal threats to neighbors and staff, and engaged in, quote, violent fights, according to the April 13th 3-day notice. Home River Group has addressed all maintenance and code issues at the property and will continue to address any such reported by the tenant regardless of any eviction proceedings, said the regional manager of this Home River, California institution. The pending eviction is not related to the tenant reported maintenance or code issues. Okay, first of all, need to say it. That's probably a lie. They are probably flat out lying in this instance. Especially when we look at what exactly was the main issue going on here. So the person had been at their home asking Home River for plumbing repairs dating back to December 2018 when she moved in. In February, the issue came to a head when she came home from a weekend trip to find her bedroom flooded with sewage and feces. There's no words for that. There's no words and justification for why somebody has to complain about their plumbing issues to the point where it backs up into their bedroom and ends up flooding the room with feces. There's no justification for this. Home River said it would take 3 days to send someone out, and so the person contacted the city's code compliance division. That's quite reasonable if you ask me. Just because they said, oh, it's going to take us 3 days to get feces out of your bedroom, and to fix the sewage system that caused that? No, you're going to contact somebody who's going to get results immediately. So after an inspection, code violations were determined, that the sewer had been replaced without a permit or inspection. According to city website, The city also issued code violations for broken foundation, vent screens, branches, and debris blocking the front of the electric panel, and deteriorated exterior paint. The case is still active, meaning the city has not verified that the owner has addressed all of the violations. And so, what I feel is kind of evident here is that this person filed a complaint, went over the head of the landlord, and like any good authoritarian, the landlord struck back and made up accusations to send this to court where they knew they would likely win. See, the thing is, when it comes to eviction proceedings of any sort, court proceedings are notoriously difficult for tenants to win, as most states do not guarantee a lawyer and legal fees can be very high. This means that tenants are forced to often fend for themselves and to go through a ton of legal paperwork, where even a single misunderstood law could mean the end of your case and could mean that you essentially lose your home. But that's not the only fear here. Because the second it goes to court, the second this landlord decided after the 3 days to evict this person because they didn't clear the premises in a timely fashion according to their needs, they enter into a situation where they could potentially be put on another form of retaliation, a tenant blacklist. If you end up on any court documents involving a case with a landlord, even if you win, there are certain organizations that will collect the information and will make it available for landlords, and a lot of landlords will just not rent to you in the future, meaning you're gonna have a lot of issues getting a new home afterwards. And this isn't even counting the fact that here in 2022, when we're having this conversation, rent prices are through the roof right now and have risen through the pandemic. So next up, another story that I want to talk about is a case where, just like where we have unions at workplaces being targeted for trying to organize, a landlord got upset that their tenants were organizing and tried to crack down on that, especially in this case in response to a new law that was passed in San Francisco. So we have here that shortly after San Francisco renters celebrated a law that expands tenant rights, one of the city's biggest landlords fired back, notifying its residents that they can be evicted for attempting to organize. At the end of June, Green Tree Property Management, a subsidiary of corporate landlord Veritas Investments, emailed its residents 9 pages of updated housing rules and noted that violating any of them may result in an eviction. The rules prohibit multiple actions vital to organizing, such as distribution of literature in common areas, the hanging of signs or posters on any doors or windows, and soliciting more than 4 times a year. The document explicitly states Veritas's new rules are a response to a new tenants law. So in response to the state, trying to put forward a law that would actually potentially help people, this is how this company responded back. And they took it out on their tenants. This is not uncommon, and the way that they're doing so is, again, by preventing them from doing anything that can potentially lead to them organizing. If you can't meet with people in your building, and you can't organize like that in your building, and you can't put up signs to talk about this, what are you supposed to do to organize your neighbors? So they are specifically targeting that, and they even have other rules like where having a single boisterous party can lead to the management evicting people at sole discretion, which is ridiculous. There should be a warning system in place, and it should not be at the management's sole discretion to do such a thing for a single incident. That means that having the music too loud one time in your apartment, even if it's annoying, even if the neighbors are complaining about it, right? Just having it loud one time can lead to you losing your home. That's scary. And, the management could make that up for somebody who's organizing, right? Like, there's no way to determine that they're actually being honest about all of this. So, this is kind of the type of situation that we're talking about, where they have this authoritarian power over people's lives. So finally, I want to bring up one more example where tenants actually felt the need to fight back simply because of how dangerous their living conditions had actually gotten. And this is just the extent of how bad things can get sometimes, where you're forced with no other recourse to put yourself at risk for ending up on maybe a tenant blacklist or ending up in court where you have to fight these difficult battles, because the alternative is potentially dying. So we have here that for the residents of Lazy Days mobile home in Phoenix, standing up to management means retaliation. But the community feels that they have no other option because they worry their lives depend on it. When you go to sleep, you never know if you're going to get up the next morning, this one person had said. Them, like many other residents, are concerned about electrical lines and boxes that have not been replaced since the 1970s. The boxes can serve up to 50 amps, while newer parks can serve up to at least 100 to 200 amps, enough to safely handle 21st century energy loads. It's not really difficult to understand that energy costs and needs have increased since the 1970s. Computers, especially desktops, nowadays, if you have a GPU in it, can end up running into close to the 1,000-watt range if you have it fully decked out. So, like, and with newer models, that's becoming more and more common. So if you have anything from, the current era in terms of technology, you need to have more power being pulled, and you need to be able to handle that. You need to be able to handle higher energy loads. The old electrical boxes have overloaded and caused electrical fires on properties across the park. Residents have said, our life could be in danger. If it happened across the park, it could happen right where you are too. And that's terrifying. That's no way to live when you're in constant fear that you might end up with an electrical box overloading and causing a fire in your home where you'll lose everything that you own. I need to remind you that if you're paying into a landlord to do their job and to maintain these things, one, the service should be provided, but two, if the landlord loses their property, they lose an investment that they likely have insurance on. If you lose it, you lose everything that you own in your home. And there's a huge disparity of power in that regard as well. Many residents did not want to speak to the media or to be seen protesting after past incidents in which they had been targeted with fees and other retaliatory measures. One person who's the co-chair of Arizona Poor People's Campaign had said, when the Arizona Mirror attempted to contact the owners of the property, it was met with many of the same issues residents had been facing. Phone numbers led to voicemail boxes that were not set up, and emails went unreturned. This is, according to them, the last bastion of affordable housing in the area. And the thing is when it comes to affordable housing, a lot of landlords are going to try to make it, especially now where they're seeing a rise in rents, so that affordable housing is no longer a thing. They're going to try to get rid of things like rent stabilization, rent control, etc., just to be able to rent the property off to somebody else who's willing to pay way more for it. And it's really making it difficult for a lot of people to be able to afford their homes. Another report had found that the mobile home park had routinely charged fees for violations of rules and regulations or pet violations, which then became the basis of eviction notices. The fees can range anywhere from $25 to $250. Typically, rents at Lazy Days are between $600 and $800 a month. You're not finding that pretty much anywhere else in the country right now. I'm just being real. Like, rents have gone up way, way more than that. And when residents are hit with fees, they're not told even what the violation was or when it occurred, only that they need to pay all their rent, utilities, and fines, or the rental agreement will be terminated. Meaning if you don't pay these random fees and increased values that they're not even told what you did wrong to, potentially make it go away, you could have your agreement terminated, which means you lose your home. One resident had spoke to the Mirror about a neighbor who was charged a pet violation fee for a pet that had been deceased for months. Another resident was charged $25 for a vehicle that had been repossessed months earlier, according to the report. And many of the fines were targeted at very specific people. And this is how we know it's a form of retaliation, right? When you see specific people being targeted for a number of different reasons. So almost all of the residents who attended the first meeting to organize a tenants union for the park told organizers that they began to face more frequent fines, and some were served eviction notices. And you see this kind of practice with unions as well. A lot of companies will try to sidestep labor laws and the organization efforts of the unions. We've seen it with Amazon, we've seen it with the Starbucks workers, where they'll take these steps to sidestep all of the work that the union's done to maybe fire somebody and say, oh, it wasn't for that. It was for this random violation that this employee committed. It wasn't because they were organizing. It couldn't be that. We're not like that. We support the law. And you see these kind of positions happen quite often. The largest act of retaliation would come when the residents held a prayer vigil outside of an ill resident's trailer after a tenants' union meeting. The next day, management directed all the tenants to be placing their trash cans outside of that resident's home. Now, if that isn't an obvious form of retaliation, I don't know what is. And honestly, it's a really petty one. But yeah, like these type of things are happening all across the country. They happen in other countries as well. Canada has a huge issue with a lot of this. These are just small examples of the large pool of different cases of this that we can look at. Landlord retaliation happens far more often than it's talked about, and to be perfectly honest, it needs to be discussed more and more openly. These landlords strike back at tenants for asking for basic services and needs in the desire to have a safe home, and that's a service that they're supposedly pay for the landlord, because the landlord isn't providing housing. If it's providing anything, it's supposed to be the safe home that they're supposed to be in, right? Like, they're supposed to be the ones making sure the home is maintained in such a way that people can live there. That's part of what they're doing, right? So if they're not providing the safe home, then they're not doing the one small thing that they're, trying to accomplish with their investment. They're not, earning the money that they don't even deserve in the first place, So in the desire to have a safe home and all of this, people get retaliated against. And it happens in so many different ways. It happens in these small petty ways, like the trash bin thing that we just saw. It happens in legal ways, using the court and the justice system as a tool and a weapon. It happens in the form of financial penalties, and it occurs in ways that make life dangerous or unlivable, or even flat out makes people lose their homes in the long run. In the short term, the best way that we can all fight back against this is to work with our communities and to form tenant unions or associations. And as with workplaces, defending yourself can always be easier when you have a group of people negotiating with you and working with you. It can completely change the game, make one feel less isolated, and remove some of the power and threat that the landlord has over tenants. When you're collectively bargaining, sometimes tenants can't afford to have an entire group of people or an entire building of people leave at the same time. So you gain a financial leverage that you wouldn't otherwise have if you were defending yourself alone. We need to look out for our neighbors and the people in our lives, especially fellow renters. And as rent prices continue to increase, as they have over the course of the pandemic, I expect a lot more landlords to start taking up these types of tactics. And only by looking out for each other can we see better outcomes. That said, we need to start looking towards long-term solutions. And in the long term, we really do need to abolish landlords. They don't serve the function that they think they do. They're not providing housing. If a house exists, it's already there. And there's no reason that we should have an authoritarian entity running our lives and our homes. Collective ownership by tenants of former rental spaces will be the way to go in the future. As in all aspects of our lives, consensus and democratic decision-making should be the processes that we use to run our communities and our neighborhoods. And we should not be living in fear of the whims of a demagogue when we need to survive and thrive in our homes. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched today, I hope you do consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as consider joining my Discord. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, also do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I've mentioned are in the description down below, and with that said, my name is Anarchist Terra, and I thank you for watching.